Adam Smith, wasn't actually this champion of, pure hands-off economics? What if he was, well, a much more nuanced thinker, someone who actually worried quite a bit about inequality, about corruption?
That's exactly what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into his huge work, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, published way back 1776.
A landmark year for other reasons, too, of course.
Indeed. And this dive, it draws heavily from detailed excerpts we have from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, Context, Principles, and Legacy. Our real goal here is to get past the usual sound bites. We want to uncover let's say, the real intellectual architecture of what Smith was thinking.
Explore the history, the context he was writing in, understand his core ideas,
and see why they're still incredibly relevant, and sometimes maybe surprisingly critical of the economic world we're living in right now.
So get ready. We're going to try and unpack the real depth of Smith's vision. Hopefully his insights give you a kind of shortcut to being, well, properly informed about the foundations of our modern economy.
Okay, let's start by setting the scene. What was the world like before Smith, or as he was coming up?
Right, context is key. He came out of the Scottish Enlightenment, didn't he?
Yeah.
A really vibrant intellectual time. Absolutely. A period of just immense curiosity, groundbreaking ideas. And his early life, particularly his education, really laid the groundwork for his later economic theories.
And those educational experiences were quite different. Glasgow versus Oxford?
Very different. Glasgow under Francis Hutcheson, who he apparently called the never-to-be-forgotten Dr. Hutcheson, that was transformative for him.
But Oxford, not so much.
Not so much as putting it mildly. He found Balliol College deeply disillusioning, famously called it a sanctuary in which exploded systems and obsolete prejudices found shelter and protection. Ouch.
Wow. Strong words. And what's really interesting is how that bad experience directly fed into his later writing. In Book V of Wealth of Nations, he's critiquing university endowments.
How so?
He argued that public funding, when it wasn't linked to performance, well, it necessarily diminished more or less the necessity of application in the teachers. Basically, if your pay isn't tied to student fees or how well you teach, you might slack off.
So even back then, you see him thinking about incentives, misaligned incentives.
Exactly. It was an early version of that core idea. Then, after Oxford, he does this grand tour of Europe as a tutor.
Right. France, Switzerland, met some big names. Voltaire, the physiocrats.
Yes, connected with major thinkers like Voltaire and, importantly, the physiocrats, led by Francois Quesnay. That trip wasn't just intellectually stimulating, it crucially gave him the financial independence he needed to actually sit down and write The Wealth of Nations.
And he had his circle back in Scotland too, right? David Hume.
Very close friends with Hume, constantly debating and discussing with other Scottish Enlightenment figures. It's a rich intellectual backdrop.
Which makes it seem even stranger, maybe, that later in life, he takes this job as Commissioner of Customs in Edinburgh. I mean, given how strongly he argued against tariff.
It does seem like a paradox, doesn't it? It really highlights he was a complex person. Maybe he believed in public service, even if the role seemed, well, at odds with some of his core economic arguments.
To really grasp Wealth of Nations, you're saying we need to look at his earlier big book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments from 1759.
Absolutely essential. It's not really a separate thing. Think of it as the essential psychological and ethical foundation for his economic work. It comes first for a reason.
And that's where we get ideas like sympathy and the impartial spectator. Can you unpack those a bit? How do they connect to economics?
Sure. Sympathy for Smith was basically what we'd call empathy today. Our ability to understand and share the feelings of others. He saw it as the root of our moral judgments.
Okay.
And the impartial spectator is like an inner voice, an internalized conscience. It's this sort of detached perspective guiding us towards behavior that society would generally approve of.
So why is that so crucial for understanding Wealth of Nations?
Because it shows the person engaging in economic activity, the person in Wealth of Nations, isn't just a caricature of pure self-interest, not the sort of cold, calculating homo economicus people sometimes imagine.
Right. So the baker or the butcher acting in their self-interest, they're still operating within a social context. They still care about fairness, reputation.
Exactly. They're complex social beings, motivated by self-interest, yes, but also shaped by this desire for social approval, guided by that impartial spectator.
Okay, so this helps address that old debate, the Adam Smith problem, the idea that the two books contradicted each other.
Precisely. That debate's largely settled now. Most scholars see the books as completely complementary. Moral Sentiments sets up the moral and social framework.
The ethical rules of the game, sort of.
You could put it that way, yeah. And then Wealth of Nations explains how self-interest operates within that framework to drive prosperity. It's all very much in line with the Scottish Enlightenment's approach. Empirical, observational, trying to find the underlying mechanisms, almost like Newton did for physics. Smith was building a science of a statesman or legislator.
Okay, so if moral sentiments provides the foundation, what was the main target Wealth of Nations was attacking?
Mercantilism. Plain and simple. The dominant economic thinking of his time, roughly 16th to 18th centuries. His book was a direct, systematic assault on it.
And mercantilism was basically economic nationalism.
Yeah.
All about state control.
Pretty much. Its core ideas were, first, bullionism, the belief that a nation's wealth is measured by how much gold and silver it has piled up.
Got it. More gold equals richer country.
Right. Second, a really strong zero-sum view of trade. They thought one country could only get richer if another got poorer. Trade was a kind of war.
So the goal was always to export more than you import, to get that gold flowing in.
Exactly. A favorable balance of trade. That was the obsession.
And governments were heavily involved in making that happen.
Massively. High tariffs, quotas to block imports, sometimes outright prohibitions, granting exclusive monopolies to favored companies. Think the British East India Company. And colonialism was key colonies existed to supply cheap raw materials and buy finished goods from the mother country.
What were the results of all this?
Well, constant trade wars, retaliatory tariffs that choked off commerce, wealth got concentrated in the hands of politically connected merchants, and according to our source, it fueled almost constant military conflict. Wars were more frequent and more extensive because nations needed bullion to finance their armies.
So Smith wasn't just tweaking economic policy, he was challenging the whole political and military setup of Europe.
It was radical, really radical. The contrast is stark if you lay it out.
Okay, let's try that. Source of wealth. Mercantilism says gold and silver.
Smith says it's the annual production of goods and services, the real stuff people use.
View of trade. Mercantilism, zero sum.
Smith, positive sum. Mutually beneficial exchange.
Role of government. Mercantilism, heavy intervention, control.
Smith, limited defense, justice, certain public works, let the system work.
Key goal. Mercantilism, favorable balance of trade.
Smith, increased productivity, higher standard of living for everyone.
And who benefits? Mercantilism, the state, favored traders.
Smith, the general population, through more stuff at lower prices.
It's important to add, though, Smith wasn't just inventing this out of thin air, was he? He was sort of articulating a reality that was already starting to emerge.
That's a great point. The industrial capitalist system was already bubbling up, already upending the mercantilist system. Smith provided the intellectual framework, the justification for this rising bourgeois class.
Okay, so we've set the stage. Let's get into the core principles of the Wealth of Nations itself. What's the engine driving this new system?
It all starts with the division of labor. That's the powerhouse.
The pin factory. That's Bookine, right? The classic example. An untrained worker makes maybe 1 pin a day.
Versus 10 specialized workers churning out, 48,000 pins? That's 4,800 per worker. A staggering increase.
But it's not just that they make more pins. Smith digs into why, doesn't he?
Exactly. He breaks it down. 3 key things happen. 1, workers get incredibly good, dexterous at their one simple task.
Makes sense. Practice makes perfect.
2, you save loads of time. No more switching from one job to another, putting down tools, picking up others. And 3, it actually spurs invention. Workers focus on one small step are more likely to figure out little improvements, little machines to make their specific task easier or faster.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about efficiency, it's about innovation too.
Right. And this focus on productivity, that was the revolutionary part. It completely changed the goal. Not hoarding gold, but boosting the flow of goods and services, improving life for ordinary people, even the lowest ranks, as he put it.
That really does feel modern. And where does this division of labor come from? Is it planned?
No, he says it arises naturally from a fundamental human propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. We just seem wired to trade and specialize.
But there's a limit, right? You can only specialize so much.
If the market isn't big enough to support it.
Exactly.
The division of labor is always limited by the extent of the market. That's a crucial insight.
Which explains why cities, or places with easy transport like rivers or coasts, water carriage, were so important early on. They allowed bigger markets.
Precisely. Bigger markets allow finer specialization, which boosts productivity, which creates more wealth.
And connecting this back to mercantilism, their policies actually shrank the effective market, didn't they? with all the tariffs and bans.
Absolutely. They were actively impeding wealth creation, according to Smith's logic. Free trade becomes essential, not just nice to have, if you want maximum productivity. The logic holds together beautifully.
Okay, but if everyone is just specializing and pursuing their own game, how does it all hang together? Doesn't it just become chaos?
Well, that leads us to his system of natural liberty, and probably his most famous and maybe misunderstood concept.
The invisible hand. And the butcher, the brewer, the baker quote.
That's the one. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest.
But again, we need to be careful here. He doesn't just mean raw greed, does he? It's more like enlightened self-interest.
Exactly. In a competitive market that's key to serve your own interests long-term, you have to serve your customers' interests, offer a decent product, a fair price. Otherwise, they go elsewhere. It creates these mutual interdependencies.
And we have to remember the context from the theory of moral sentiments, right? These are still social beings who care about reputation, fairness, guided by that impartial spectator.
Right. The system relies on a certain level of morality. If that breaks down, the market potentially breaks down too. It requires a reasonably virtuous citizenry.
So the invisible hand isn't magic. It's the idea that individual pursuits within this framework unintentionally end up benefiting society as a whole.
Yes. It's a metaphor for the self-regulating nature of the market, primarily through the price system.
How does that work, the price mechanism?
Well, if something's scarce and in demand, the price goes up. Higher prices mean higher profits, which attracts new producers into that market.
Okay, increasing supply.
Which eventually brings the price back down. Conversely, if there's a glut of something, prices and profits fall, pushing producers to shift their capital and efforts elsewhere where it's more needed. It allocates resources efficiently without central planning.
But, and this seems crucial, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It needs rules.
Absolutely critical caveat. The invisible hand requires specific institutional preconditions. You need competition, no monopolies rigging the game, and you need a solid framework of justice. Property rights need to be secure, contracts enforced. It's not anarchy, it's ordered liberty. That's a really important distinction. Okay, moving on. How does Smith think about value itself? And how does wealth actually grow? He had that famous diamond water paradox.
Right. Water is incredibly useful, essential even, but has very low exchange value. Diamonds are pretty useless, practically speaking, but have a very high exchange value, a high price. Why?
And his answer involved labor.
He proposed a labor theory of value. Basically, he argued that the real measure of a commodity's exchangeable value is the amount of labor it enables you to purchase or command. Labor is the ultimate cost.
But didn't he see problems with that himself? Especially once you move beyond simple societies.
He did. He acknowledged its limitations in a commercial economy where the price has to cover not just the worker's wage, but also the capitalist's profit and the landlord's rent. As our source notes, the whole produce of labor does not always belong to the laborer.
So it's kind of an unresolved inconsistency.
You could say that. But the source makes a great point. This failure was actually incredibly productive. It basically set the core problem for classical economists after him to wrestle with.
Like Ricardo? And even Marx. Didn't Marx take this labor theory and run with it?
He absolutely did. Marx radicalized it into his theory of surplus value, the idea that profit comes from paying workers less than the value their labor actually creates. Exploitation, basically. So Smith's ambiguity here had huge consequences down the line.
But even if his value theory was tricky, his ideas on capital accumulation were groundbreaking, weren't they?
Monumental, yes. This is where he really shifts the focus. Forget static piles of gold. National prosperity comes from capital accumulation, which fuels the dynamic flow of goods and services produced annually. That's the ancestor of GDP or GNP thinking.
And he saw this as a cycle, a virtuous circle.
Exactly. It starts with savings. Savings provide the funds for capital accumulation, buying more tools, better machinery, building factories.
Which then allows for more division of labor, boosts productivity.
Generates a larger surplus, which means more potential savings, more investment, and the circle continues. That's how nations get rich.
He also made a distinction between types of labor. Productive versus unproductive.
Yes. Productive labor, for Smith, was labor that resulted in a tangible, vendable commodity, like a factory worker making cloth. Unproductive labor didn't think menial servants, soldiers, even opera singers. He argued growth depended on shifting resources towards productive labor, fueled by capital.
And underpinning this whole cycle of saving and investment is security.
Absolutely critical precondition. People won't save and invest if they fear their capital will be stolen or arbitrarily seized by the state. It comes back again and again to the need for a reliable system of justice.
Okay, so we've seen how individuals and markets drive wealth, but they need that framework.
Yeah.
This brings us to the role of the state, the duties of the sovereign. It's a myth that Smith wanted no government, right? He wasn't a pure laissez-faire guy.
Definitely a myth. The source is clear. He never used the term laissez-faire.
Yeah.
His system of natural liberty was much more considered than just leave everything alone.
In fact, he was pretty wary of businessmen, wasn't he?
Deeply suspicious sometimes. He talked about their mean rapacity, their tendency to conspire to raise prices, to deceive, and even to oppress the public by seeking monopolies and special favors from government. He definitely thought the state needed to step in sometimes to restrain liberty if it harmed society.
So what did he see as the state's essential jobs? He lays out 3 main duties in Book Fee.
That's right. First, protecting society from external threats, violence, and invasion, national defense. And interestingly, he argued that in a modern commercial society, this required a professional standing army, not just militias.
Okay, defense. What's second?
The administration of justice, protecting every citizen from injustice or oppression by other citizens. This means courts, police, enforcing contracts, protecting property rights. An independent judiciary is key here.
Defense, justice.
Yeah.
And third,
Erecting and maintaining certain public works and public institutions. These are things that are beneficial to society, but wouldn't be profitable for any individual or small group to provide on their own.
like roads, canals, maybe basic education.
Exactly, those kinds of things. Together, these 3 duties create the framework: external security, internal security, and the essential infrastructure, both physical and human, that allows the market economy to function and thrive. The state provides the stable and secure container.
How did he think these public works should be managed or paid for?
He was very pragmatic. For things like roads, bridges, canals, he thought the cost should ideally fall on those who use them through tolls or fees. That way, you ensure there's real commercial demand, and it creates an incentive for proper maintenance.
Makes sense. If the users pay, they'll complain if it's falling apart.
Right. If tolls weren't feasible, he preferred local administration and funding over central government control, again, for better accountability.
What about education? That seems different from a canal.
It is, and his thoughts here are really interesting. He worried that the extreme division of labor, doing the same tiny task over and over, could actually make workers. Well, his words were, as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. He called this a public evil.
That's a strong concern about the downside of his own engine of wealth.
It is. And because of that, he argued the state had a vital role in ensuring the common people received at least a basic education.
How should that be funded? Did he have ideas on that too?
He did, drawing from the Scottish parish school model. He suggested teachers get some public funding, but a significant chunk of their income should come directly from student fees paid by parents.
Ah, the incentive argument again. Keep teachers accountable and diligent.
Precisely. It reflects his constant worry about negligence and profusion in organizations where pay is disconnected from performance and accountability.
So defense, justice, public works. Which of these did he see as most fundamental?
Justice seems to be the absolute bedrock. Remember that quote from his earlier lecture, 1755? Little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice.
All the rest being brought about by the natural course of things. That's powerful.
Justice provides security from injury, which he called the foundation of civil government. Without it, commerce and manufacturing simply can't flourish. People won't invest, trade, or innovate if they fear being robbed or cheated without recourse.
And I love that word tolerable. He wasn't demanding perfection, was he?
Not at all. He was a realist. He believed that fundamental human drive to better our condition was so strong, it could overcome a lot of bad policies and obstacles, provided there was just a basic, tolerable level of security for life and property.
He also had a pretty unsentimental view of where government came from in the first place, didn't he?
Very much so. He argued that in really early, rude societies, like hunter-gatherers with little property, you don't really need much government. Formal government, he said, really arises only when you get significant amounts of property, and especially unequal property.
Yeah, that really blunt line, too. Civil government is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor.
That sounds almost Marxist.
It does sound stark, but Smith's conclusion was completely different from Marx's. Smith basically said, yes, that's what it's for, and that's okay, because protecting property, even unequal property, is the necessary condition for the capital accumulation that ultimately benefits everyone, including the poor, by generating that universal opulence.
So it connects back. Protecting the rich allows the engine of capitalism to work, which eventually lifts everyone up.
That was his argument. And it ties back neatly to moral sentiments, too. Our sense of justice stems from resentment against injury. The state's role is to channel that resentment into a predictable legal system, allowing for peaceful cooperation instead of endless cycles of revenge or conflict. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about the legacy. Wealth of Nations, March 9th, 1776. A huge moment.
A genuinely revolutionary event in intellectual history. It's pretty much seen as the foundational text of modern economics.
It really set the stage for 19th century capitalism.
Yeah.
Influenced actual policy.
Absolutely. Policymakers like William Pitt the Younger in Britain drew on it. It gave the rising industrial business class their sort of intellectual ammunition.
And its influence just spread, even to critics.
Hugely influential. Shaped the classical economists who followed him, like Ricardo, Mill. And as we mentioned, even his fiercest critic, Karl Marx, was deeply engaged with Smith's work. It basically set the terms of economic debate for the next 150 years.
Why was it so impactful? Was it just the ideas or something else?
The ideas were profound, but timing was key. It landed right as the Industrial Revolution was taking off, and his style helped. It wasn't dense academic jargon mostly. It was filled with, plain common sense, relatable examples, homely observations.
And it offered this compelling new picture of society. An economy that could run itself, generate progress spontaneously.
Exactly. That resonated powerfully, especially, say, with the American founders. It seemed like an economic parallel to their vision of political liberty.
But you mentioned a paradoxical legacy. How so?
Well, it became the charter for capitalism, absolutely. But embedded within it were also the seeds of capitalism's critique. Marx grabbed the labor theory of value, and Smith's own vivid descriptions of the conditions of the poor, his concerns about the division of labor. Later critics used those too.
Let's talk about some of those major critiques. Marx, for instance. He admired Smith in some ways.
He did praise Smith for identifying labor as the source of value, but his big criticism was that Smith treated capitalist categories, wages, profit, rent, private property, as if they were timeless, universal and natural laws. Marx argued they were specific to a particular historical stage. Smith was being ahistorical.
And where Smith saw potential harmony through the market.
Marx saw fundamental, irreconcilable class conflict. He believed the very forces Smith celebrated, division of labor, capital accumulation, would inevitably lead to capitalism's collapse through exploitation, crises, worker alienation. For Marx, Smith's engine of opulence, the division of labor, was actually a source of human degradation.
Okay, fast forward a bit. What about the Keynesian critique? That emerged later, right, after the Great Depression.
Exactly. The 1930s were a massive challenge to the Smithian idea that markets automatically self-correct and tend towards full employment. Clearly, they didn't seem to be doing that.
So Keynes said the invisible hand could fumble the ball.
Essentially, yes. Keynes argued that the overall level of demand in the economy could be too low for long periods. And what's rational for an individual, like saving more money during a recession, could be collectively disastrous if everyone does it, because it reduces spending and makes the recession worse.
And Keynes' solution was government intervention.
Active government management. Using fiscal policy, government spending and taxes, and monetary policy interest rates to deliberately manage aggregate demand and stabilize the economy. This was a direct rejection of Smith's generally limited role for the state in the macroeconomy.
So if you had to boil it down, these three figures offer really different models of how the economy works.
Fundamentally different. Smith tends towards stable equilibrium, driven by self-interest within rules. Marx, the dynamic, historical, conflict-driven model, heading towards crisis. Keynes, potentially unstable, psychologically influenced model that can get stuck and needs active management.
Okay, bringing it to today, the 21st century. How does Smith resonate now? Globalization seems like a big one.
But many see modern globalization as the ultimate expression of Smith's vision, the whole world as one giant market, allowing specialization in trade on a global scale. Core ideas like absolute and comparative advantage still underpin organizations like the WTO.
But there are criticisms of globalization, too.
often framed in Smithian terms, ironically.
Well, critics argue that unchecked global competition can lead to a race to the bottom, downward pressure on wages, labor standards, environmental regulations, erosion of social safety nets. These challenge the idea that everyone automatically benefits.
What about inequality? That's a huge topic today. We said Smith was concerned about the poor.
He was definitely not an egalitarian in the modern sense, but he was deeply concerned. Remember, no society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable.
How might he view today's levels of inequality?
It's speculative, of course, but many scholars argue he'd be highly critical, especially of inequality driven by what he'd see as market distortions, rent-seeking, where wealth comes not from creating value, but from manipulating the system, getting special favors, monopolies, subsidies.
So crony capitalism would be something he'd despise.
Absolutely. He'd likely see it as a complete betrayal of his system of natural liberty. And drawing on moral sentiments, you could argue extreme inequality itself corrodes the social trust and sympathy needed for a healthy society.
One area where he seems obviously dated is the environment, right? 18th century thinker.
Yeah.
No real concept of ecological limits.
That's fair. Environmental externalities, pollution costs, these weren't really on the radar in 1776. It's a definite blind spot in the original model.
But maybe his way of thinking is still useful.
Possibly. He was aware that private actions could impose costs on others. His critique of the East India Company shows that. So his analytical tools looking at incentives, unintended consequences, institutional failures can absolutely be applied to environmental problems today. Some scholars are even trying to develop a distinctly Smithian environmental ethic based on his broader philosophy.
So wrapping up, what's the big takeaway? Why keep reading and thinking about Smith?
I think his enduring relevance isn't about specific policy prescriptions from 1776. It's about the power of his analytical framework, thinking about incentives, the role of institutions, the complex interplay between self-interest and the public good, spotting unintended consequences.
And his criticisms, especially of businesses cozying up to government, of misaligned incentives, those feel pretty timeless.
They really do. And if you take that holistic view we talked about, integrating the economic analysis of wealth of nations with the moral philosophy of moral sentiments, you get a much richer picture.
A picture where maybe a lot of what we see today, crony capitalism, huge inequalities driven by rigged markets, disregard for the common good, Smith wouldn't see that as his system working well.
Exactly. He wouldn't see it as a triumph of the invisible hand. He'd likely see it as a failure of the state to uphold its core duties, particularly providing that tolerable administration of justice and maintaining what he called the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice.
So the father of capitalism actually gives us some of the best tools to diagnose the problems within modern capitalism.
That's the fascinating paradox, and perhaps the greatest testament to the depth and enduring power of his thought.
Something for you, the listener, to definitely chew on. Keep exploring these ideas. Keep applying that Smithian lens to the world around you.